Cary Grant turned $3 million into $50 million, and almost none of it came from movies. While most people think Hollywood money came from paychecks, residuals, endorsement deals, the real fortunes in classic Hollywood weren't built on the screen. They were built off it. While stars like Grant and Audrey Hepburn were famous for their performances, they were quietly building empires through real estate, production companies, smart investments, and business moves their studios didn't want them making. And here's the thing that makes it interesting. Some of them succeeded by being ruthless. Others made decisions that haunted them. A few managed both. Today, we're looking at how the biggest stars of Hollywood's golden age actually built their wealth through profit participation deals, back-end points, and breaking free from the studio contract system, and what it cost them to get there. These stars succeeded in building wealth beyond the screen because they understood something most entertainers never figure out. Your name and your image are assets. They're products. You can license them. You can invest in your own projects. You can negotiate profit participation and back-end deals from a position of strength if you're willing to fight for it. Some of them made that work beautifully. Others paid the personal price. But all of them understood that the real money in Hollywood isn't made performing. It's made by owning something that generates income long after the cameras stop rolling. Frank Sinatra, the entertainer who owned the business, Frank Sinatra understood something early that most performers never figure out. Owning the recording is worth more than performing the recording. While other singers were happy to get paid for their vocals, Sinatra started his own record label, Reprise Records, in 1960. He had creative control. He owned the masters. When his songs sold, he didn't just get paid as an artist, he got paid as a label owner. He was making money on multiple levels from the same product. But Sinatra went further. He didn't just run a label, he got involved in production. He built studios. He invested in radio stations and TV production companies. By the 1960s, Sinatra was earning more from his business interests than he was from performing. He was essentially running a media empire with himself as the flagship product. The smart part was that he kept performing. He didn't retire into pure business. He stayed relevant, stayed in the spotlight, which meant his business ventures stayed profitable. Frank Sinatra knew his name was valuable, and he monetized every aspect of it. The dark side of Sinatra's empire building was that he treated it like a mob operation. People who worked for him were either loyal or gone. There was no middle ground. He made deals with people who had serious criminal connections, decisions that probably cost him more money in the long run than they ever made him. He paid people off to keep quiet about his relationships and business practices. By some estimates, Sinatra spent as much money covering his tracks as he made from his legitimate business ventures. When he died, his net worth was around $200 million, but nobody really knows how much went to settlements and payoffs along the way. Elizabeth Taylor, the actress who negotiated like a CEO. Elizabeth Taylor was famous for many things, but one thing gets overlooked. She was one of the first actors to really understand how to negotiate her own deals. In an era when studios owned actors like property under the studio contract system, Taylor fought back. In the 1960s, she demanded something no female actor had ever gotten before: profit participation. Not just a salary, but a percentage of the film's profits. When she agreed to play Cleopatra in 1963, she didn't just negotiate a salary. Working with agent Lew Wasserman and his revolutionary profit participation model, she negotiated for $1 million up front, which was unheard of at the time, plus a percentage of the gross profits. That single decision made her more money than most actors made in their entire careers. She set a precedent. Other actors looked at what Taylor had done and demanded the same thing. Studios complained, but they had no choice. If they wanted the biggest stars, they had to give them a piece of the pie. Taylor also understood the value of her personal brand. She sold jewelry, perfume, and clothing lines that bore her name. She licensed her image and persona. She didn't just act, she was a business. By the 1980s, her endorsement deals and product lines were generating more revenue than her acting work. She was smart enough to know that her fame was a finite asset. It wouldn't last forever, so she had to monetize every aspect of it while she was still relevant. The problem with Taylor's approach was that it fed her spending habits. The more money she made, the more she spent. Husbands, jewelry, properties, plastic surgery, legal battles. By some accounts, Taylor spent more than she made, which is hard to do when you're making tens of millions of dollars. But that's the thing about treating yourself like a business. If you don't carefully manage your expenses, you can go broke even while making a fortune. Cary Grant, the methodical operator. Cary Grant was careful about money in a way that Hollywood didn't celebrate. While other stars were making headlines for their extravagant purchases, Grant was quietly building a diversified portfolio. He invested in insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, and technology startups before anyone else in Hollywood was even thinking about tech. He had financial advisors who did the legwork, but Grant stayed involved. He read the prospectuses. He understood what he was investing in. Grant also negotiated fiercely for his acting roles. He knew his value, and he made studios pay for it. But he was smart about it. Instead of just demanding more money, he'd demand profit participation, or stock options or ownership stakes in production companies. By the time Grant was in his 60s, he barely needed to work. His investments were generating enough passive income that he could be selective about his roles. He only did projects he actually wanted to do, which meant his later films were often his best ones because he wasn't desperate for money. The interesting thing about Grant is that he never got rich from a single windfall. He didn't have one incredible deal that changed everything. He just made 1,000 small, smart decisions over 4 decades. He invested $3 million and watched it turn into $50 million. He didn't flash it around. He didn't brag about it. But behind closed doors, Grant lived like royalty, and he did it by being disciplined and patient. The trade-off was that Grant was paranoid about money. He trusted almost no one. He went through multiple marriages partly because he couldn't let people close enough to see his finances. That wealth came at a cost to his personal happiness. Walt Disney, the visionary who built an empire. Walt Disney wasn't really an actor in the traditional sense, but he performed for the camera, and his name was the draw. Disney understood something fundamental that most entertainers missed. The intellectual property is more valuable than the performance. Your voice acting in a cartoon is one-time work, but the character you created, the stories you told, those last forever if you own them. Disney built his empire on one core principle: vertical integration. He didn't just make cartoons. He owned the animators, the studios, the distribution networks, the marketing. He eventually owned the theme parks where people paid money to experience his intellectual property in person. By the 1960s, Disney wasn't just an entertainment company, it was a financial empire that was generating revenue from dozens of different streams, all connected to the core intellectual property that Disney had created and owned. But Disney did something else that was brilliant and also deeply problematic. He paid his workers incredibly low wages while the company made massive profits. The animators who created the characters that would eventually make billions of dollars were making less than factory workers. Disney used the talent and creativity of hundreds of people while keeping almost all the profits for himself. There was a strike in 1941 where the Screen Cartoonists Guild and animators like Art Babbitt, creator of Goofy, demanded better pay and conditions. Disney fought back viciously. He fired strikers. He blacklisted people in the industry. He was ruthless about protecting his empire and his profits. Disney's approach worked financially. By the time he died in 1966, he had built a company that would eventually be worth hundreds of billions of dollars. But he did it by being one of the most exploitative employers in entertainment history. He took people's creative work and made fortunes from it, while paying them as little as possible. That contradiction is the core of Disney's legacy. Visionary businessman, ruthless employer, both things are true. Audrey Hepburn, the careful custodian of her image. Audrey Hepburn was careful about her career in a way that most actors weren't. She turned down more roles than she accepted. She was selective. That selectivity had a purpose. Hepburn understood that her image was her most valuable asset. If she did too much work, or if she did the wrong work, she'd dilute that image. So she rationed her appearances. She was disciplined about which films she did and which ones she refused. This approach made her more valuable, not less. Because Hepburn films were rare, they were events. Studios would pay enormous sums to get her in their movies because they knew audiences would show up. She negotiated from a position of extreme strength. By the 1970s, Hepburn wasn't just getting a salary for her films, she was getting points on the gross and approval over major creative decisions. She had more control than most directors. Hepburn also licensed her image very carefully. She didn't just put her face on any product. She said yes to brands that aligned with her image as a sophisticated, elegant woman. She turned down deals that didn't fit. Because of that discipline, when she did put her name behind something, it meant something. A perfume or a clothing line with Hepburn's name became a luxury item. She commanded premium prices because of the rarity and the careful curation of her brand. The interesting thing about Hepburn's approach is that it was almost European in its sensibility. American actors tend to monetize everything and take every opportunity. Hepburn was more like a luxury brand, limited edition, carefully controlled. That approach made her wealthier than she probably would have been if she'd just said yes to everything. But it also meant she worked less and spent more time on her personal life, which gave her something most Hollywood stars never got: peace. Humphrey Bogart, the production deal maker. Humphrey Bogart figured out something that changed the trajectory of his career and his finances. He realized that studios would offer him better deals if he had his own production company. So, in 1948, after Mark Hellinger's death in December 1947, he started Santana Productions. The idea was simple. Bogart would star in films that his company produced, which meant he'd get a piece of the profits instead of just taking a salary. At first, studios pushed back. They were used to owning the products their actors made under the studio contract system, but Bogart had leverage. He was already a star. Studios wanted him, so they agreed. Bogart would make films through his production company, which meant he could negotiate better terms with the studios. He could hire directors he liked. He could shape the scripts. He had actual creative control, not just the illusion of it. The first film Bogart made through Santana Productions was Knock on Any Door in 1949. It was successful. Bogart made considerably more money from that one film through his production company than he would have made taking a standard actor's salary. Word got out. Other actors saw what Bogart had done and started demanding the same thing. Production companies became the standard way for major actors to negotiate their deals. Bogart basically invented the modern actor-producer deal that still exists today. The catch is that Bogart didn't get rich from this alone. He made good money, but he wasn't trying to build a billion-dollar empire. He wanted creative control and fair compensation. His production company was a means to those ends, not an end in itself. He died in 1957 at 57, so he never got to see how his innovation would reshape the industry. But the template he created is still being used by actors today. Gene Autry, the cowboy who owned everything. Gene Autry was a singing cowboy, and he understood something that separated him from other entertainers. Owning the broadcast rights was worth more than performing. While other actors were content to be paid for their appearances, Autry started buying the rights to his own films and TV shows through Flying A Productions. He owned the master copies. When his shows aired in syndication, he got paid for every broadcast. But Autry went much further. He bought radio stations. He bought television stations through Golden West Broadcasters. He eventually owned one of the largest networks of broadcasting properties in the western United States, including KTLA in Los Angeles, which he sold for $245 million in 1982. By the 1960s, Gene Autry was no longer really an entertainer. He was a media mogul who had once been an entertainer. The films and the TV shows were products for his network, not the other way around. Autry also invested heavily in real estate and sports. He owned a piece of the Los Angeles Angels baseball team. He had investments in oil and natural gas exploration in Oklahoma and Texas. By the time he retired from active entertainment, Autry had diversified his income streams so much that entertainment was only a fraction of his wealth. He'd built a conglomerate. The interesting part is that Autry never became famous for being a businessman. People still thought of him as the singing cowboy. But behind the scenes, he was running a complex, multi-billion-dollar operation. He hired smart people to manage different divisions of his empire while he made the major decisions. By some estimates, Autry died with a net worth of around $600 million, making him one of the wealthiest entertainers of his generation. But most people have no idea because he kept his business dealings out of the public eye. He let the image stay as the cowboy while the money piled up behind closed doors. Shirley MacLaine, the negotiator who kept her power. Shirley MacLaine came up in Hollywood during an era when women actors had very little power. Studios owned them under the studio contract system. They told them what to wear, who to be seen with, what image to project. MacLaine decided early that she wasn't going to accept that. She fought her contracts. She refused roles that didn't interest her. She turned down substantial paychecks to avoid doing films that felt compromising. That might sound idealistic, but it was actually a brilliant business strategy. By refusing bad deals, MacLaine made herself more valuable. Studios wanted her. They had to offer her better terms to get her to sign on. She negotiated for profit participation before most female actors even knew that was possible. She demanded script approval. She wanted approval over her co-stars and directors. Instead of just taking what studios offered, she forced them to negotiate with her as an equal. MacLaine also didn't just invest in business ventures. She invested in herself. She took acting classes throughout her career to keep improving. She learned about cinematography and editing so she could understand the technical side of filmmaking. She educated herself about the financial side. That knowledge gave her power in negotiations. She wasn't just an actor asking for more money. She was a professional who understood every aspect of the business and could negotiate intelligently. The thing about McLean's approach is that it wasn't greedy. She didn't try to maximize every single dollar. She just insisted on being treated fairly and having control over her own career. That discipline meant she worked less, but she worked on projects she actually wanted to do. She built a career that lasted 6 decades because she never compromised on her core values. By the 1990s, McLean was a legend, not just as an actor, but as someone who had fought the system and won. Stuart Granger, the transatlantic operator. Stuart Granger understood something that most American actors missed. There was money to be made by working internationally. In the 1950s, when most Hollywood actors stayed in California and did American films, Granger was negotiating deals to work in Europe. He made films in England, France, Italy. Each country had its own film industry and its own money. Granger negotiated carefully for each of those deals. He'd do a Hollywood film for a big studio, where he'd accept a lower upfront salary in exchange for profit participation. Then, he'd go to Europe and work in a high-budget international production, where he'd demand a huge upfront fee because he was an American star working in a foreign market. He could charge more because he had American name recognition that would help the film sell in export markets. By working across multiple countries and film industries, Granger diversified his income streams. He wasn't dependent on Hollywood studios. He had options. Studios knew that. It gave him leverage. If a Hollywood deal didn't work, he could go make a European film instead. That competition meant studios had to offer him better terms to keep him working in the American film industry. Granger also invested in real estate in multiple countries. He had properties in California, England, and France. He understood that money made in different currencies in different countries was a hedge against economic problems in any single country. If the American dollar weakened, he had assets in pounds and francs. It was sophisticated thinking for an actor in the 1950s. Most actors didn't think about currency risk or international diversification. Granger did, and it made him wealthier than he would have been if he'd just stuck to Hollywood. These stars succeeded in building wealth beyond the screen because they understood something most entertainers never figure out. Your name and your image are assets. They're products. You can license them. You can invest in your own projects. You can negotiate profit participation and back-end deals from a position of strength if you're willing to fight for it. Some of them made that work beautifully. Others paid a personal price. But all of them understood that the real money in Hollywood isn't made performing. It's made by owning something that generates income long after the cameras stop rolling.